What's up, everybody? This is Mike Leone here with Drew Dinkmeyer, Chris Pacheco, breaking down the U.S. Open. This is going to be a pretty unorganized show, but we wanted to do this, have some fun, talk about the U.S. Open. $1 million on the line on DraftKings, tons of good GPPs outside of the Millie Maker, and right before this broadcast started, we were talking about some line moves things out. I know different books have guys at different numbers, but I've been following the numbers on Sportsbook, sportsbook.ag all week long, and Kisner has moved up a decent amount. I think he started at like 55 to 1, then went to 50 to 1. I'm seeing him at 45 to 1 now, just 7,600 on DK. He'll be pretty chalky, but he's someone who's moving up the board. Keimer, who I thought would be really chalky at 7K on DK. He's moved back slightly. I know I've got a decision on one of my GPP teams between, using Rahm and Kisner versus Day and Keimer. And I felt really good about Day and Keimer, especially because I think it's going to be lower owned. But the odd movements making me think otherwise. Drew, I know up top you saw some other line movement on some of the studs.
Yeah, just looking from the start of the week, it looks like Rahm has kind of held at the 18 to 1 range, where Day's gotten up to 10 to 1. This is interesting for me because this is going a little bit away from where my personal feel is on things. Days was looking like a guy that I was planning on taking a lower position against, especially if he was going to be kind of spread out against the field. And just to give an idea of what I'm referencing for like ownership projections, Colin Drew has done some ownership projections. He tweeted out from his Twitter account earlier, Drewby, whatever the numbers are. Logan butchered the numbers. I'm going to actually look it up before
417.
417. I mean, what 417? Probably some area code, right, Drewby? You can.
I always get it wrong, Drewby's Twitter name.
But he tweeted earlier. He's posted the Google Doc for free that you can check out. He's updated these during the course of the week, and to my dismay, he keeps updating them in the direction of players that I want to play. Unfortunately. Oh, it's your birthday? That's very cute and original. 417.
April birthdays are pretty sweet, though.
I pretty much just ignore them, and my wife's birthday is in April as well because it's during overlap season. So I'm sorry, Drewby. Have a better birthday next time.
Be better. Have a better birth.
But yeah, it looks like at the top, there's been some good movement for positive movement in money coming in on Day. Spieth has closed the gap with Rory a little bit, still trailing DJ. Fowler has kind of stayed put. Rahm's kind of stayed put. And it looks like to me, the guys that have shot way up during the course of the week are, you mentioned Kisner. Peters has moved up a lot during the course of the week. He's up to 35 to 1 to win now. It looks like...
Dude, Stenson's fallen back. He didn't start very high, but he's fallen back.
Yeah, he's fallen back to 40 to 1. That just seems like a good number in general. Henrik was another guy that I was planning on not having a ton of exposure to this week, but from a betting perspective, that seems like a really good number just in general to get him. You mentioned Molinari's fallen. He's a guy that I liked coming into the week, but as the weather has kind of looked like it's going to make it so that the course plays longer, I've kind of toned down that excitement for Molinari a little bit. It just looks like they collected some rain today. Some of the different like practice round stuff that I was watching, and then references from like Rifo18 on Twitter, who's out at the course, was talking about how the ball wasn't rolling out so much. So I came into the US Open thinking like people were going to overemphasize distance, and there was going to be an advantage to accuracy. But then as the weather's kind of turned out, I think the driving distance thing is going to matter quite a bit. And I think odds are starting to reflect that. Some of the guys that are moving up are long. Thomas Peters is long. Jason Day is long. Some of the guys that are moving down, Martin Keimer, Francesco Molinari, they're not as long. So I think you're seeing some of that play out in the odds.
Freaking Lee Westwood, 71. The odds always love that guy.
He is my nightmare because I never play him ever at majors, especially the Masters, where he's got like great course history and he gets priced up, and he's usually played like crap for weeks going in and then miraculously puts rounds together. But he's really cheap here. And because so many other guys in that range are getting ownership attention, I don't think he's going to be super high on because he's the same price as Benny On, and Leishman is right there, and Ross Fisher's gotten touted a little bit. So I'm kind of torn on him. He's not a guy that I would put for me in my 3 max or high stake stuff, but I will likely have exposure in mass multi-entry.
All right, let's start from the top then and go over plays for cash and GPP. I think we'll mostly do DK. I just say that selfishly because I can't play on FanDuel, so I've not as acclimated with FanDuel. But up top, if you're playing cash games, I think DJ is someone that you want to build around. We always get softer pricing for the majors. You can build some pretty balanced lineups even with DJ. Pacheco, you didn't jump in on the odds conversation too much. I'll throw it to you first. If you're building around one stud in cash games, is it DJ, or are you going to try and like eke out 2 studs by going not using DJ?
Well, I guess it depends, right? Does Stenson count as a stud?
You're using Stenson in cash games?
Hey, please don't give me that face, first of all.
All right, let's just cancel the show. We're not giving people good advice.
Okay, my bad. Anyways, I didn't mean that, but I think, yeah, I mean, DJ, of course, he's such an easy fit this week, but I also think Rory at 11-2, it just seems like I really like my builds with Rory. It's not like I don't like them with DJ, but I really, really like them a lot with Rory. Those are probably the 2 that I'm leaning right now. I'm not going to fit them both, of course, but those are my current leans. And I think right now I really like Rory because of my current builds.
Yeah, so the thing with Rory is he's got a rib injury that he's supposedly healthy now, but he's had a long layoff. It's nice to get that $800 savings and talk about length, DJ and Rory as long as you can get. Drew, do you have concerns about Rory's injury in cash games? Like for me, I'm not playing much cash. I'm mostly GPP, but for the cash games I am in, like I just don't see the need to take any risk with Rory. But maybe there isn't risk, and I'm just imagining it.
It's tough to say. So the injury, he says, is not causing him pain, but he said he has to be mindful of how many swings he takes in a day, basically. So it limits some of his range time. And he says it's helped him focus a little bit more on stuff around the greens, his short game and different stuff like that, because, it's more full swings that he has to monitor. But that is a concern for a player who hasn't played a lot over the last few months because he's been nursing this injury. If you can only hit so many balls, how do you feel in rhythm? So I kind of think I'd rather take DJ in cash or drop down to somebody like, a Rom or a Sergio, or I'm not as much on Fowler, but kind of in that range. I also think there's a slight preference on tee times towards the AM, PM, really, really slight. So nothing I'm like building big roster tee time stacks for or anything, but it looks like, the always the best conditions of the week are always like the first, morning. And it's been wet today in the area, so it should be pretty soft conditions. And then the wind gradually picks up during the day on Thursday, and the wind sort of like, bell curves on Friday, where it starts off mild and then, gets slightly elevated, like 2 or 3 miles per hour, and then comes back down. And DJ is in that early tee time, Rory's in the late tee time. So I think there's a slight advantage there. The only concern I have with DJ is he's been Andrew cursed, and I'm terrified of the Andrew curse. So
the Andrew curse is very real.
Yeah, so I don't know. And he also Andrew cursed Rom, who was, my primary pivot in cash games from DJ. So now I'm like totally flummoxed, and I'm trying to deal with the fact that I largely pride myself on operating as a rational, data-driven human being, but the power of the Andrew curse has terrified me for a few
and Jason Duffner is the other guy of the 3 Andrew curse guys. I feel like Day in there at 10-8. It's tough to say because he's been playing better recently, but he hasn't been playing, I think, like as good as his scores have indicated. I know watching him last week. Like he had a couple hole outs. He hasn't been great on his approach shots. In fact, he was negative strokes gained on his approach shots the last 2 weeks, even though overall tee to green he was positive. He's at 10-8. I think he would probably just pivot to Rahm in cash games. He's got the length, and we didn't really talk about the course much. Start with these top tier guys. We're talking about the course. As Drew said, length is going to be very important. It's nearly 7,800 yards. You do get 4 par 5s, which is not usual for U.S. Open, so more scoring ops. I know it sounds like at least a couple of them are reachable. They've got some par 4s, 1 or 2 that are drivable depending on the day how they're setting things up. So it sounds like a fun risk-reward course, and the fairways are supposed to be a lot wider than a usual U.S. Open. So we're expecting more scoring. Like, it's still going to play hard, but we're expecting more scoring than you would normally get. And the combination of the wide fairways and the length of the course is why we really like the Bombers, because you get the distance and you're not getting killed on accuracy with the wider fairways.
Yeah, I think it's a course that's going to reward length, and especially if it's going to be, wet and they've had rain during the course of the week and the ball's not rolling out as much. There is a lot of elevation to the course. Like, you have a lot of blind shots, you have some elevated tee shots. So, I was trying to get a feel from people, because I didn't have anybody talk about elevated adjusted yardages, which we talk about when they're in altitude or different things like that. But I'm guessing that just means that it's not that big of a deal, that it's kind of spread out in terms of where the elevation is. But it seems like distance is going to matter. A lot of the interviews that happened during the course of the week, at least the guys who hit it far, talked about how that would be an advantage. Rory talked about being able to basically hit driver on every hole that's not a par 3. So I think it's definitely something you want to take into consideration. I like I said, I came into the week thinking that accuracy would matter because the penalty is so stiff if you go into the fescue, which, these fairways are really, really wide, but the fescue, if you're in it, it's almost like a multi-stroke penalty because it's such a challenge. And then these fairway bunkers, some of them can be really, really challenging as well. So I thought accuracy would matter a lot more, but it sounds like from all the interviews from players and stuff that there is going to be a distinct advantage to Bombers, and the fairways are so wide that it's not a huge deal to be super inaccurate. Now, guys are going to take huge numbers if they do get caught up in the fescue, but it seems like a course where you can spray it a little bit and still get away with it.
Yeah, it's going to be fun because I think you could see days where there's big discrepancies in scores, even among like top tier guys. If a guy, like you said, Drew, you can make a couple big numbers pretty quickly on just a couple bad shots if you get in the fescue. And also some of the bunkers, if you just like the green side bunkers, if you just end up by bad luck in certain spots, there's like no room. I think it was Wee Kim posted a video on his Instagram, and he just like, if he wanted to get it out cleanly on one shot, for sure he had to hit away from the green just to get it out. But at the same time, there's gonna be a lot of scoring chances. So I think it's going to make it really exciting because you could see a lot of, Rose go -4, Day go +4. Like, I think you could see some wide discrepancies in scores. Looking at like the second tier studs, Rahm is 18-1 on Sportsbook. Rose and Fowler are the same. I'm wondering where Rose's ownership winds up. I feel like he's going to be lower owned than Rahm and Fowler. Fowler's been playing so well recently. Rahm is everyone's darling. Rose, there was an interesting note that in the practice round, he ended up in the fescue a whole bunch of times. And I haven't confirmed that. It sounded pretty legit, but I don't know how to weigh things like that. Like, is that just complete noise? Is that something to worry about? I know on my main GPP team, it was enough of a tiebreaker for me to move on to somebody else, and I'm sure it's something that's probably not circulating real wide, so I don't think it will impact his ownership, but I just expect him to be lower owned of that group. Pacheco, this group, Rahm, Rose, Fowler, I guess you get Scott, Sergio, Hideki in there, and odds-wise they're behind, but certainly I think that's where you end the studs, is at Hideki. Favorite cash play from that group and favorite GPP play from that group?
Well, Mike, I think this is my favorite tier in terms of everything, really, this week. I really like Rose and Hideki a lot. Hideki this year has been I suppose just like last year and historically a bad putter, but he has been so good off the tee. Shots gained off the tee this year ranked 10th. Shot gained putting 181st. So he's been awful with the putter, but really good off the tee. Of course, he does have the distance to go with it as well. So I really like him this week. I'm not sure where his ownership is going to be. I'm not great at the ownership projection stuff, so I have to rely on guys like Drewby. But at 9,600, I really like him, and I really like Justin Rose at 9,800. Again, a guy that's really good off the tee, that has a distance in this course. I like both of those a lot this week. And then Stenson, 9,300 GPP. I don't think I can pull the trigger there. No, I don't think I can pull the trigger on my boy in cash. But I really like him in GPP because I obviously think he's underpriced relative to his historical skill set, not the skill set of this year. He hasn't been great this year. And then Adam Scott, 8,800. I mean, that seems like a really good cash game play to me. I don't know if you want me to dip down below that, but if we are ending it right there, I think Scott, Matsuyama, Rose, like I really like that tier in both cash games and tournaments. It's not like I don't like Rom or Sergio or any of those guys.
Well, no, but we're asking you to pick, two and not just name them all.
Yeah, I personally, I like the 9K guys this week.
No, I got you, because when you're building, you can still build a really nice balanced lineup without him. Like we'll get to, I like Justin Thomas a lot for 8,300, and he fits if you take two of those 9K guys. Scott's going to be the chalkiest of the group because of that price, but I know Drewby had some stats, and Drew, you're good at remembering these, but he had some stats on Scott in tournaments the last couple of years that are like the big tournaments, so like the majors, the FedEx Cups, like the really good fields. And it was like 9 of 11 top 20. And I think he made the cut in all of them he made the cut, or almost all of them?
Yeah.
I mean, he was 9 of 11 top 20, so he at least made the cut in 9 of them.
He's been really good in top heavy fields, which this certainly is. I also saw his, I spent Thursday watching all the interviews that they showed on Golf Channel to just try to see if there's anything I could pick up in terms of information on the course. The thing that I came away picking up from Adam Scott's interview was how confident he felt with his game. And I didn't pay quite as much of attention to St. Jude on the weekend last weekend, and I didn't have Scott on any lineups that I was sweating, so I didn't really notice it. But he picked up tons of strokes on the field, tee to green last weekend, and just didn't make a single putt. And that's stuff you can see in our strokes gain data that Drewby puts together with Tableau. And he talked about how he felt a little bit like this was how his game was trending before he came into the 2013 Masters, where he felt like he really was starting to build on stuff and put something together. So I was pretty intrigued by those comments from Scott. He's a guy who's in general very accurate off the tee, very accurate with long irons. He hasn't been as great with that during the course of the year. And oddly, he went through a period during the year where he was kind of relying on putting, which is not his forte. But I'm pretty encouraged by the tee to green game coming back so strongly the last few weeks with Scott. So I think he's a great cash game play. Drewby has his projected ownership at like 20.5%, but he has that bumped up 2% on kind of a gut feel. So the data is saying about 18.5. Colin's saying he thinks it'll be about 20.5. I actually, coming into the week, I thought that number would be higher. So I'm not too scared of that number from a GPP ownership perspective. He's a guy that I'll probably be overweight on because I just really like the price tag on him, and I think it allows you access to him as your second stud alongside even expensive studs. On that Rose note, the one thing that I did see, I saw the note about the fescue from somebody replying to Rifo, who was tweeting thoughts about the course and different stuff like that. But then I saw afterwards, when they were doing some of the coverage today, that Rose was on the practice on the range working with his swing coach afterwards, and they were trying to adjust some stuff with his swing. So I don't know, with these guys, who knows? It could be a big deal. It might not be a big deal at all. But for me, if I'm looking for reasons to get away from guys, usually I try to look for reasons in the ownership to move around. And when the ownership is pretty condensed, I'm not getting a lot of reasons. So I'm going to start to lean on other things that are harder to qualify for me. And something like that with Rose, like and remember, Rose took off the Memorial, didn't play Jack's tournament because he said he wanted to stay back and work on his game. He didn't feel like his game was ready for the US Open. So I think that's something personally for me that is going to lead me to have less exposure to Justin Rose than the field.
And you talked about the condensed ownership. Like if you look at Drewby's ownership projections, up top, the more expensive guys, DJ in particular, then Spieth, Rory, Day, he's got carrying more ownership. DJ above everybody else at 27%. But then after that, it's like everybody between 15 to 20%. The guy that sticks out most to me is like Hideki around 12%. But even at that point, like if you like Rahm a lot, and assuming you're agreeing with Drewby's projections, like how much weight are you going to put in? I can get Hideki as the lowest. He might be the lowest owned of the group, but how much leverage are you really gaining if you're getting him, 4.5 ownership points less than Rahm, I guess.
Yeah, and that's where it comes down to the level of precision with these things, which Colin's done a lot of work on this, and he does a really good job, and he's been tracking these the last few weeks with really high R squareds and he generally gets the high owned guys right. It's just a matter of magnitude. But magnitude, when it's the difference between like if Rahm is 16 and Hideki's 12 versus if Rahm's 20 and Hideki's 8, it's a big difference. So it's a little bit tricky for me. That's where I'm going to try to have the guys that I just feel strongest about. And I'm a Jon Rahm guy. The miscut at Memorial, I had a ton of Rahm that week. I thought the course was set up really well for him. I had just loads of him. That was the week that he and DJ missed. And I followed his rounds pretty closely, not only on Shot Tracker, but on PGA Tour Live. And frankly, he just missed a ton of short putts that week. And I know the strokes gain stuff doesn't look that great off the tee, but he had 2 drives that were too long that went in the water. They weren't like wayward drives. He just hit them too far and they went in the water. And that's obviously not a concern here. So I think his game is still in fine form. I'm not super worried about the miscut. And I think the price tag relative to the other top guys has me leaning in the direction where Rahm's probably going to be one of my higher owned guys from that tier. And I'm in the one guy that I was interested to see on ownership. I was hoping he'd come in a little bit lower was Sergio, because I think we're so used to Sergio being priced down in the majors that price tag of 10K feels like, oh man, that's 10K for Sergio, because he was like 8,100 at the Masters when, Mike, you loaded up on him. You had 100% of them in the Millie Maker. It's a little bit of sticker shock, but the dude is totally worth it in terms of, tee to green game. He's longer than a lot of people give him credit for. And you look at strokes gained off the tee and strokes gained approach. I mean, that's what Sergio does. So Sergio is a guy that I like in this range a little bit. I probably like him more than Day. I know odds don't agree at all. Like Sergio is at 28-1 and Day's at 10-1 now to win on Sportsbook. But personally, my instinct is that I like Sergio a little bit more. I'm kind of with you, Mike, where like Day's last few rounds where he's picked up a lot of strokes around the green on like hole outs and chip ins and different things like that has me a little bit concerned that the approach game just hasn't been there. But I'm looking at this and Vegas is telling me the exact opposite. So that's a little bit of a concern.
So one note on Rahm, I have heard people saying this might be, it's a taxing course. It's a pretty long course to walk. The guys will have to keep their emotions in check. He certainly seemed, to get angry last week with some of those bad bounces. That's very Narrative Street-esque, but wanted to point that out. Before we move on, we'll cover why Stenson probably isn't a great play, because we kind of glossed over that in joking with Pacheco. But if you look at the tee to green game, and I linked our strokes gain trend, which comes from the tableau that Drewby puts together all week. If you look at all the tournaments he's played, I mean, he's barely positive in like 2 of 6 tournaments that we have data on.
It's also tough to tell with him because he's withdrawn from all these events where the data would be even worse in those events that he just quit like midway through because he was so bad. So I feel like some of the data with him might be even worse. And then you factor in how strongly the line movements worked against him to get down to 40-1 now. I thought coming into the week, I thought he'd be a guy that like you'd be looking at a projected ownership of like 5%, but he's getting tagged enough that the ownership's going to be like still spread out in this region. So for me, that's going to be a 0 for me. I'm not going to have any sense in this week.
I'm going to have him in the Millie Maker just because my strategy for the Millie Maker is similar to last time where I went all in Sergio. I have a guy I'm going to go all in on, and then I like to just spread the risk a ton. But as in my my non-Millie Maker GPPs, the higher stakes ones, I agree. I'm not going to have any Stenson. I just don't think it's worth it. With the condensed ownership, it's not like you're getting him at 5%, and there's going to be guys at like 40-50%. Everyone's going to be like 15 to 20. So
yeah, and if he for clarification purposes for me, if he was going to be a 3% play, I think he'd be a good play. But at 10%, I don't think he's a great play. And that's kind of where it comes down to for me. And I know Drewby's given us crap that like we don't have enough faith in Albatross. Albatross does not have, because Albatross actually likes Stenson as a value this week. Remember, this is something Christian mentioned on an earlier podcast. Those withdrawals don't really count against him in terms of the adjusted round scores that go into some of the projections. So those aren't taken into account. So his projection is probably a little bit inflated from his unwillingness to finish out rounds where he's been really, really bad.
Question in chat: who's your favorite play for GPP in the higher stakes entries? Dude, I'm pretty chalky. Like honestly, in my teams, it's more just fading DJ, who I think in higher stakes, DJ and Rory, the ownership is going to be even higher. Like I still think we're going to see some things condensed, but I could see both of them 30 plus. So I feel like one mistake I've made is trying to be too contrarian sometimes in the upper stakes tournaments, when if you make one or two big fades, you can just put together your best lineup after those fades rather than fading people and making contrarian plays. So I know that's a little bit of a cop-out by not putting on one guy, but that's where I'm at. I guess, I mean, Thomas Peters is the guy that I'm rolling with in all my lineups this week. He's my boy, but that's not like a specific, like, oh, I love him because he's going to be super low owned. He's going to be somewhat chalky. But let's move on. Before we get into the mid-tier, which we'll get into Peters when we do that, Brooks Koepka, he's certainly a bomber. Nobody's talking about him with his price tag on DK. Similar to Stenson for me, I'll have him in MME, not my upper stakes. I did notice if you play FanDuel 8,400, you get more of a discount. And I still think he could be caught like pretty low owned. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on Koepka before we move on. Did I say it right this time?
Yeah, you said it right. So Colin, he's another guy that, again, like Stenson, I thought I wasn't sure on Koepka's ownership. I thought Stenson would be lower, but coming into the week, like not hearing as many people talk about him, I didn't think the projected ownership would be that high. Colin's got him at 11%. And like, that's okay, but you're not really getting a big advantage in terms of ownership on leverage over the field at that area. So I'm probably not going to have a lot of Koepka. Now, if you're saying he's your primary pivot from like Adam Scott, and you want to fade Adam Scott because Adam Scott's going to be chalky, or Brandon Grace, who got a little bit of traction from, Pat Mayo's show and a couple other places, I understand that a little bit more. I'm more likely, if I'm going to fade those guys, I'm more likely to go down than up. So I'm kind of off that Koepka range. I'm kind of like the low nines. I'm kind of off entirely personally. And for me, the reason with Brooks that I'm off is while the course fit is terrific, for a guy who's super, super long, he has not been adding shots off the tee until the St. Jude. He had been adding kind of minimal shots off the tee, basically, not like these big advantages. And the approach game's been wildly, wildly inconsistent with Brooks. So I'm gonna take my chances at lower price tags with guys that I think are volatile. And Mike, you named one that we'll get to a little bit down the road, but Justin Thomas for me is he's like Brooks Koepka, but $700 cheaper, and Colin has a projected ownership that's like 5 to 7 points lower. So I'm just going to take Justin Thomas as a pivot off Scott on the lineups that I don't have Scott to get exposure to these types of guys.
Yeah, so we'll segue this into let's break this mid-tier and between like 7,700, which is where Peter's at, and 8,600, which is where Grace is at. That kind of middles out the average cost of a roster spot. It's an interesting tier. You've got a lot of guys with some big time upside, guys you can put it out there like Chapel, Berger. These are guys that, I don't know, I guess I just associate some volatility, some upside with them. Bubba Watson, 8,200, Grace, 8,600. And then you get some guys like Duffner and Casey, who I would consider like safer of this group. I don't know if safe is the word I'm looking for, but
more consistent, the most consistent guys.
Yeah, more consistent. Like, I don't know if like the super high end upside is there for them,
for sure,
but the floor might be, like, the made cut probability might be a little bit better. So I think it's an interesting tier, and it's one where, like, if people go to Grace a lot, like, that would be fantastic, because I think this tier in general could go, I don't think it's going to go super low owned, but I think it could be lower than it should, because people like to go studs and duds. And you build lineups with DJ, you might be only able to grab one guy from here instead of two guys from here. And I really like grabbing, like, I love Thomas Peters, who's long off the tee. I think he ended up T4 at the Masters. His odds have been improving all week long. He's somebody that him and Justin Thomas, I think, have the length and the correct price tags, that they're just really good plays, but they're not going to be over owned because people are hitting the top tier guys so much that, and then Grace is going to carry some ownership. So I like those two guys a lot. I'm thinking of bumping up Thomas, and my Millie Maker strategy is really built around Thomas Peters, going all in on him and then spreading the risk and just trimming the fat, so to speak, like not taking any guys I think are really bad plays and then just spreading the risk among everybody else. But I think I may make an exception for Justin Thomas and really up my ownership exposure there. Pacheco, we haven't heard from you in a little bit. So in this tier, I guess just if you try to limit to like 1 to 2 favorite plays for cash, and then if you have a GPP pivot.
Mike, I think I can summarize it best for the guys that I'm not going to use here, because there are two that stick out like a sore thumb for me. Bubba Watson is one I am not going to use. First off, I don't do much of multiple, like big multiple entries like the Millie Maker. I probably won't do that. Probably playing the softer tournaments. So like, I guess Bubba would be like an MME guy, and I'm just not going to play that. So I'm not playing him. And Snedeker at 7,800. Like, Snedeker last couple tournaments really bad in terms of picking up shots gained off the tee. I'm not really sure if the wrist thing, it was either like a hand or a wrist injury that he had. I'm not sure if that's resurfacing again, but it doesn't look like he's been great lately. Those are probably two guys I'm maxing out completely. And then Casey, I like a lot from this tier, especially from a cash game perspective. I really like him. Justin Thomas would be the other at 8,300 that I think deserves some consideration this week for sure.
Yeah, I didn't realize, I guess the earlier versions of Colin's ownership projections didn't have Thomas quite as high, but I guess he's jumped up to like 14 now. So you're actually not getting an ownership edge on Brooks. Brooks is obviously more expensive, but I kind of thought that earlier stuff I had looked at had Justin kind of in the 7 to 8 range. So him being more expensive might push me even further down in GPPs, might push me to Berger a little bit, which is weird because Berger coming off a win, usually you get some sort of attention bump after that, but he's another guy who's really long. He's just 8K. And if his ownership projection, is going to be in the 4 to 5% range, he might be a guy that I might pivot down to in this section. But for cash, Scott's my favorite guy. And then I agree with Pacheco that I think Paul Casey's a really solid cash game play.
Mike, can I just add something really quick on Bubba? I quite frankly think at 8,200 he's flat out overpriced. I know, like, he played well in his last event, but like he really should be priced in the low 7s, probably high 6s. The way that he's played this year, which has been really, really inconsistent. That's why of this tier, I'm not going to have any.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Bubba is if you think he like found it, whatever it is last week. He certainly has the distance that you would want. I'm inclined, like, if you can play on FanDuel, he's 6,500. The ownership is obviously going to be higher, but I'm going to, even in MME, I don't have a lot of Bubba because I'm so concentrated on like Peters and Justin Thomas in this tier. So I'm with you on Bubba. Paul Casey is somebody I'm having a tough time getting a good read on, because I feel like you say his name and you're not expecting again like the high end upside here, but at the same time he's like arguably the most talented player overall of this group. I mean, Drew, do you think that's fair to say, like in terms of long-term talent, or at least like close to the top of this?
Yeah, I think he's in that tier. I mean, I think JT is probably the most talented. Him and Scott are probably a little bit ahead of Casey, but then I think it's Casey. I think Casey's more talented than Berger. I think
agreed.
Casey and Brooks. I mean, Brooks just oozes talent, but Casey's got a better, he keeps his game together. He grinds for you, where Brooks sometimes will get, he'll quit on some rounds. I
think Justin Thomas has more upside than Casey.
Oh, for sure. I think that's definitely it. It's just
he's been scoring more.
Yeah.
The thing that I wish I had a better feel on with JT is the scoring environment, because he's a guy that all of his wins have been at birdie fests, basically, and a lot of his times where he's been in contention have been at birdie fest, which is clearly not what you expect to be the US Open. But the way the guys have talked about this course during the course of the week has been that there will be scoring available if you're playing well. Yeah. So I'm kind of torn on JT, because I think he's got as much scoring upside as basically anyone in the 10K plus range, and he's 8,300. But typically US Opens are events where you have to grind and you have to keep your composure, and he usually doesn't fit that kind of profile. So I'm torn on JT now that I see his ownership a little bit higher than I originally had in my head. But yeah, I think Casey is just as talented as these guys. His ownership looks like it's going to be around the same level as JT, so it doesn't look like you're getting much of a discount there, which is one of the reasons that I like being overweight Scott in this range, because I don't feel like if Scott's like 18 to 20 and these other guys are like 14, I really don't think that's like too much of a premium to be paying. So Scott's probably going to be the guy that I'm going to have a lot.
So of the low-owned guys, Drew, you said you like Berger. I think I'm with you. The guys Drewby has projected the lowest would be Bubba, Berger, and Snedeker. I don't have much interest in Snedeker. I don't know if either of you guys do. I think of those three, if I'm going low-owned in this tier, I'm with Drew that it's Berger. He won last week. He's long off the tee. He's my guy of those three. Pacheco, I know you said you don't like Bubba, so I'm assuming you're also on the Berger train if you're going for the lowest owned guy in this tier.
Yeah, for sure. And I have mentioned at the opening that the two guys I didn't like, Bubba and then Snedeker, would be the other guy I'm Xing out personally.
Yeah, I think Sneds is a milli maker type play, because the ownership's going to be so low. But the other thing about the thing I like about Sneds traditionally for majors is that he can really grind out in tough conditions, because he putts so well and he scrambles so well. My concern is the course fit is so bad, and we don't know how healthy he is. Like I've played the Snedeker, low owned tournament train the last few weeks that he's played, and it didn't go very well for me. And he's lost a bunch of shots off the tee at the Byron Nelson and at Dean and DeLuca. So I'm probably out on Sneds, even though I think that's a good, like, a top-heavy GPP contrarian play, because I don't think many people are going to have him. I think his ownership will be really, really low. We should talk about Bubba on FanDuel, because Bubba's 6,500 on FanDuel, and that's a much tougher decision, because that's a price tag that opens up a lot more for you. There's certainly guys in that range, like Schwartzel, 6,800, who I like a lot more. But Bubba's odds are pretty good. He's at the same level as like Louis, Norin, Kuchar, Casey in terms of T20s. Overall to win, he's scrolling through now. I just lost him. But I think he's around 55.
Yeah, 50. And the thing with Bubba on FanDuel if you want to build a balanced lineup to try and get as many guys through the cut as you can, because it's 8 out of 8 and it's somewhat tight pricing, at least it gets tight if you use a stud or two, and then you have to dip down to somebody really shady. So Bubba gets you, the cap relief you want, and with some semblance of upside along with it, right? Like if you're going to the balanced lineup and you're sacrificing the win probability up top, you might want to make up for it with some guys that could, put together a T5 or T10. And, despite how we might feel about Bubba from a floor perspective, he does have that upside in him.
The thing that is really challenging me with FanDuel, just to keep it on the FanDuel conversation for a little bit, is I'm concerned that the conditions are going to be much tougher on the weekend. So getting the players through the cut, I don't think will be as big of a deal, especially when it's, a 60-person cut. It's going to be tough to get 8 of 8 through. And even if you have like a 1-player advantage on an opponent in a head-to-head or 50-50 or whatever, I'm not sure that you'll feel like it's a huge advantage because the scoring environment will be much tougher on the weekend. So I think the pricing leads you to build a little bit more balance because there's a lot of good, solid values in the middle. But I think the scoring environment leads you to build a little bit more stars and scrubs. So I'm really struggling with the balance between that decision on FanDuel. And I'm for sure in GPP is going to take a little bit more of a stars and scrubs approach, but I'm still struggling with that from a cash game perspective as well, because I started building I was building with like my highest priced player in the like Fowler or Rose range in that low 9,000s, which was a significant drop off before you got to the 10s. And there were so many guys in the 6s and 7s that looked good that it wasn't that hard to build. And I really like Lucas Glover at 5,600 as a play. Bud Cauley's pretty cheap there too. But the more that I think through it, I want to try to jam some high end production into my lineups on FanDuel. But it's tricky. I think the challenge between the tighter pricing but a little bit loose on the middle end versus the benefit of having extra players on the cut and having more chances is kind of a tougher thing to weigh in a US Open where the scoring environment on the weekend probably won't be as strong. So one of the things I'm struggling with.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for balance, I guess some guys that were mentioned, to go with the studs and duds strategy in chat, Bordy at 5,500, Wes Bryant 5,800, Glover 5,600, who you mentioned. I know Albatross has Glover as a good play. I know based on odds, Glover is the clear-cut guy there. Drew, I guess the tough part, if you're playing GPPs on FanDuel, is Glover going to be like super high owned just because, like, if you're making a lineup and you're like, oh, I clicked DJ, now I need a cheap guy. Yeah. Is everyone going to click Glover, or do you think they'll spread it around enough?
That's a good question. I'm kind of looking at who some of the other values in that range were, because he was the first one that really stood out to me. He's probably gonna have a lot of ownership at that level. Did
you mention Wesley Bryan, Mike?
Just briefly, 5,800. He was mentioned in chat by BW. I think he's one of those guys. I know Kokrak's in there. He's 5,600. I don't think he's good enough, but he's long.
For me, Cauley, Glover, and Ross Fisher are the 3 guys sub 6K that are most appealing to me. I think above that, when you're talking cheap FanDuel, I think really good tournament play, Jonathan Vegas. Really good course fit from a guy who's long. And 5,800 is a really good price tag, and people aren't going to take him over Glover or Cauley, who have been really popular of late. Brian Harmon, I think on both sites, is a really good tournament play. He's been playing really, really well, and he's priced along other guys that people like to talk about more. So I think the ownership's going to be really low on Brian Harmon. He's a guy that's pretty long off the tee, has good long iron and approach game as well. He's also cheap on FanDuel at 6,300. I think those are the main guys I'm looking at for cheap exposure on FanDuel this week.
What do you think about Siwoo Kim, 6,100? I don't know what to do with him. I know the odds, I think, are inflated. Obviously, the win at the Players' Championship. Is this like a boom or bust guy where he's got the upside to place really well? or does he just have a couple of random tournaments where he's had variance on his side and he's really just not good? It's just surprising to see his odds pretty well, even with that Players Championship win.
I honestly don't know what to make of that dude. He's another guy that has withdrawn so frequently, like way more frequently than Stenson actually. I think Stenson has like 2 withdrawals in the last like 6-7 months, whereas Siwoo Kim I think has like 2 in his last 7 events. I don't understand because his metrics are so poor. I don't understand how he won the Players. I don't understand his odds. So he's probably a guy I won't have a lot of exposure to, but I can't figure him out. But Vegas likes him. There's something about him that Vegas likes.
Mike, I have a play on FanDuel that I really like at these price tags. Right next to Lucas Glover, actually, Jason Kokrak at 5,600. He's long off the tee. And this year he's 11th on shots gained off the tee, and his putter has let him down like big time. And he's kind of like, again, like the golfer I like this week, Hideki Matsuyama, like really good off the tee, terrible putter. I feel like he has the upside to compete at 5,600. I think I like that play in tournaments.
So Kokrak, we have him, top 10 in driving distance on our Albatross shots gained tab. If you're a premium subscriber, you get that. But we also have like shots gained on approach shots, and on the longer approach shots, 250, 200, 150 out, that whole range, we have Kokrak ranking pretty well in all of those. But like big news right now is that we have a special guest. He said he wasn't going to come on the show, but I see him.
He came on just to pronounce.
Drewby, the man behind the ownership projections, and actually the man behind our strokes gained trend tool as well. What's up, dude?
He came on just to pronounce Kokrak because you freaking.
Yeah, it felt like it was slowing down and needed a little jolt of late night energy.
I did Kokrak right when I said his name, and then Checo came in and did it wrong. I've been doing good. I've been on point.
Yikes! Sorry.
Anyone playing Steve Stryker?
I will say that narrative, the whole Wisconsin narrative, didn't get talked up as much this week as I thought it might.
Well, what's the Wisconsin narrative? Who's
Aaron Rodgers?
Oh, like Stricker was like building his entire PGA Tour schedule to the U.S. and at Aaron Hills because he's a Wisconsin boy.
Well, he's also Steve Stricker and a million years old. He can't put it out with these guys. I said it, Drewby.
I have my own Stricker narratives that like I'm frustrated. I wanted to buy into, but this course fit is just so terrible. But like I believe that Stricker is a guy because he doesn't leave Wisconsin during the off season, so he like practices out of a trailer, so he doesn't get like a lot of time on the course. And I believe his recent play has been in part because he's been playing so much more frequently and he's kind of finding form and getting into rhythm because his off season's a little bit different than everybody else's. But this course is just a really I mean, he's going to be potentially, hitting 3 into some par 4s because he's just not very, very long at all.
Hummel joined us for like half a second and just awkwardly drank a beer and then left. All right, so DraftKings, let's move below the 7,700, below my Thomas Peters love, and get into this next group of guys. Kuchar seems underpriced, but yet again, he's one of those guys that you're not really associating with upside. Fortunate enough for him to hit a hole-in-one for me at the Masters, so that worked out pretty well, but I don't know if you can count on him to do that again. You're looking for good finish points out of him. You're hoping he makes the cut. T20, it's enough for you. Some other guys in this tier, Haddon is really interesting at 7,500. A couple guys that the odds like a ton, Kisner and Noren at 7,500. This is a big tier, so I'm not going to go through every one, but one guy that's really long off the tee that I think is always a good GPP play. It doesn't seem like it's worked out great recently. Maybe that's just my own experience, but JB Holmes we have as the leader in driving distance. Drewby, you're fresh meat, so who are your favorite? I guess we'll just say 7,000 to 7,600 on DK because there's a lot of names there.
Yeah, so I think we talked about some of our favorites on the podcast, but I actually think like the more the weeks went on, I think Kuchar's kind of interesting to me just because I like.
Is Drewby dead?
Did he die?
I think Drewby's dead.
I think that
Drewby.
moves
There he
people
is.
away from him. The Players Champion. Am I still?
You're going in and out. You gotta get that internet fixed, Drewby.
That's
Winning
the
those
guy.
3 maxes, you should put it towards, some.
Hey man, I gotta save up for some.
You're good now. Wait, Kuchar take. What's the Kuchar take?
Oh, so I was gonna say one of the things I pulled together was just performance in the majors and the Players Championship and all the FedEx Cups, and Kuchar's actually got a bunch of top 4 than I would have given him credit for, 3 in the last 11 events and kind of these elite fields. And so, I mean, hole one aside, I think like he's a guy here that I think with like Peters grabbing ownership and Kisner grabbing ownership, he might be the lowest owned of those 3. So I actually like him a little bit more than I did earlier on in the week.
Interesting, Drew. I know a guy you like in this tier. I don't know how much publicity you want. I think I've already announced him as the winner. So
I've already screwed everything up because
he's French, but like I like to pronounce his name like Oosthuizen, like German.
Like
I don't know why.
German.
Oosthuizen.
So
Or like
I think
Japanese, like Top Chef style.
I already screwed up everything with Louis because his ownership, every projection that every time Colin pings me that there's new ownership that he's like updated, Louis goes higher. And it's been tilting me all week. And I'm not sure if he's doing this to intentionally tilt me or if he's trying to teach me a lesson for picking a 7,400 guy to win on the Pat Mayo hour that you're going to get punished for that. But he's now up to, the Thomas Peters range in ownership. And I didn't think he'd quite get there. I still like him a lot. I think it's a really good course fit. I think he's one of these guys that shows up in majors often. I think he's the guy that when he's at his best, he can play in the same way that some of the very, very top players can play, which I don't think you'll always find guys in this range. So I'm going to have a lot of Louis, even at inflated ownership. He's one of my favorite plays on the slate. I do think you'll probably get him at better ownership on FanDuel, where he's priced up a little bit more at 8,400. I'm still going to have quite a bit over there. I really like the way Louis has been playing. I really like the course fit. I thought coming into the week, I thought he'd be like an 8% guy. And now it looks like he's going to be a 15+% guy. And that just takes a lot of the wind out of my sails for how excited I was to play him. So that's frustrating for me, but I'm still going to stick with it.
I could take some more wind out from Louis if you want me to.
No, I mean, it would make me feel better, but I don't know that it would necessarily make anything more accurate, which I know is your goal. I do think one thing that Colin mentioned about Kuchar, I'm surprised now, like the momentum in this tier has moved so strongly away from Kuchar. I came into the week thinking Kuchar would be really chalky, and now seeing him projected around 13 instead of like 18, I know it's a small difference, but it's a difference that has me more intrigued with Kuchar than I was kind of before. And I'll throw one other name alongside JB Holmes as a really good GPP play for the same reasons is Gary Woodland, who's also in those low 7,000s, super long off the tee. And just like JB, course fit a little bit better. And you're looking at like 2% projected ownership on these guys. So Woodland and Holmes from a DK perspective are some of my preferred GPP pivots in this range.
Louis Oosthuizen, not from France.
No, he's not from France at all. I have no idea he's South African.
I think Mayo said something in some French accent one time, and I just assumed he was.
Oh, man.
Kuchar, top albatross value in our version 2 update. Second best albatross value, Phil Mickelson, if he plays. Note that he's probably not going to play. He's at his daughter's graduation. A lot of talk in the DailyRoto Slack, what you would do. Daughter is the valedictorian, high school graduation. Do you go or play the U.S. Open? He's going to fly out and hope his tee time gets delayed. And if it does, hopefully he makes it in time, but that seems unlikely. Pacheco, are you skipping your daughter's graduation to play in the U.S. Open? Yes or no?
I love how this is the question I get, and I'm the first one to answer. It's unbelievable. I would probably skip it. Probably skip it.
Skip
it.
the graduation or the U.S. Open?
Well, Drew, that's the point. I would skip the graduation probably.
Drewby.
I mean, I think I'd skip the graduation to play DFS for the U.S. Open.
Good one. Good one.
That was good. All right, we'll just leave it there and just leave Pacheco as the jerk who wouldn't go to his daughter's graduation, and the rest of us don't have to answer.
The question on Louis, like, is this whole narrative with Louis, like, we're talking like he becomes like the Kingslayer when he shows up to majors or whatever. I'm looking at the numbers, and he kind of seems like he's just like average at majors, and then he sucks at all the other tournaments. And so I don't know. I mean, it seems like Kuchar's got a better track record at majors and the players than Louis does.
How dare you try to turn me in these final moments before I have to actually click submit on a bunch of lines?
I know. I'm like all messed up now. I'm like, I started with Kuchar, then I moved to Louis. Dude, now I'm like, do you guys have Norin takes? Because the odds really like him, and
you shouldn't ignore him.
Oh God.
Oh man.
Oh my God. I guess the guy here that's most interesting, if Drewby's ownerships are right, the two guys I guess I'm looking at most.
Which is a big question mark, by the way. We've never really tested this for like a big major like this.
Big major, yeah.
Hatton's going to be one of them.
Hatton rates well in the Albatross values. And then Patrick Reed, I know he like sucks now with 7,400. Like, do either of you have strong takes on Hatton or Reed? Because at this point, like, this doesn't look like spread out ownership in this tier. It's like Peters, Kisner, Oosthuizen, Norin somewhat, Schwartzel pretty high, and then like a pretty big gap, like 10 percentage points gap between guys like Reed and Hatton.
Man,
yeah, I mean,
go ahead, Drewby.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, quickly, I think if you were like building like 100 or 150 teams, this is the range where you, in like Fantasy Cruncher, you build one of those rules and you're like, take no more than 2 of these chalk guys. Start to get some of the like 2%ers mixed in, and if like Charles misses the cut, that's fine, because you'll have a bunch of teams that have like Molinari and Kamer but don't have Charles and things like that. And so I feel like this is like the range where you want to try to pivot.
Yeah,
Mike, I'm going to be honest with you. I thought Hatton was going to be someone that was going to be popular this week. I was a little bit surprised by the projection ownership here by Drewby, like 4%. Like, wow. If true, I'd love that play. Certainly.
Yeah, I wonder if it's odds based, like him and RCB. I mean, they've got Stricker odds to win this tournament.
He's not super long. He made like his run earlier in the season was heavily putting influence. Like, he's one of the best putters in the field. But he was gaining strokes off the tee in the last events that he played, in the Players and the RBC Heritage. And he's a guy that was mega chalk at the Masters. Everybody loved him at the Masters. And now you're going to get him at like 1/5 the ownership he was at the Masters at basically the same price tag. So I think he's a really, really good GPP play. I'm not sure I have the confidence to put him on one of my high stakes plays, but I'm trying to figure out who are the guys in this range. And he's a very clear pivot when you see all the chalk kind of condensing around Kisner, Kuchar, Peters, Norin, Oosthuizen, all right around him. Like, he's totally getting forgotten.
Pacheco, Derek Fisher hit a home run.
Oh, yeah. The fish from downtown, baby.
I hope Matt Barnes throws at him this weekend. I hope the rivalry between the NBA players carries over to the rivalry between MLB players. It would make me so happy.
All right, if we get to the lower 7,000s, Hadwin 7,200. Drew, you mentioned Woodland at 7,200. Steele 7,100. Burned is a guy that, if you look at like his overall stuff, it seems great. It seems like he sucks in any good tournament. I don't know if that's just my personal narrative or just a PGA thing. He's at 7,100. Then Moley and Keimer are both at 7,000. Those two really stick out as underpriced, in my opinion. Even with Keimer at like 11% on the Drewby odds or Drewby ownership projections. Like if he's there, I'm still pretty happy with that. I thought he could, wind up even chalkier. So I'm going to throw this to Drewby since you did those ownership projections. He might be dead again.
If he's alive.
It looks like he's dead. I'm going to throw this to Drew because his name is most familiar to Drewby's.
So you're talking about Keimer?
Just this low 7 range. I guess Keimer in particular. I like Keimer and Moley, I think, are the most like underpriced relative to skill set, or at least my inclination of what their skill sets are.
I agree with that. I thought coming into this week, because I thought people don't think of Molinari as long off the tee, that he would be like 6-7%, but it seems like people have figured out that he's just really good all around in general, and 15% is going to be tougher to be excited about that type of ownership. I thought Keimer would be the guy that would generate a lot, but it seemed like he got off to a slow start from a sentiment perspective and then picked a little bit up as the week went on. But 11% is not a bad tag for him. I was shocked by Burns' ownership. And it's not just Collins' ownership piece that has burned with like a decent weight. I've seen a couple others that have him in the 6, 7, 8% range. Usually for majors, you could get burned at like 1 or 2. And I thought that would be the case here. So the pivots that I'm looking towards in this range from tournaments are JB, Woodland, and I like Emiliano Grillo a lot as a pivot at 6,900. Him and Harmon are like the 2 6K pivots that I think are pretty interesting, given I don't think they're going to come with very much ownership at all. And I think those are guys that have good long iron games. They're guys that can be long off the tee. The problem with Grillo is he just takes big numbers, and that's terrifying at a U.S. Open, because when good things go wrong for Grillo, they go really wrong really fast, and he can play his way out, but it's a GPP play. It's not a cash game play. So I think Grillo and Harmon are the guys that in this area in the sub 7K that I like as tournaments. Molinari and Keimer, I'll probably be a little bit overweight both of those guys on my mass multi-entry. I'm still trying to narrow down the 3-max stuff, but the 3-max is probably a place where I'll take fades on these guys, and I'll pivot to some of the lower owned guys.
Hummel, you gonna join us? You gonna unmute yourself?
Yeah, I mean, we'll join you. I mean, we're just kind of listening along here. I mean, obviously we're dart throwers, which is totally fine. But I will say my buddy Mark over here has been like all over the Pacheco bandwagon with everything that he's had to say. So, Pacheco.
Good job.
Yeah, I know that's like new for you, but we got at least a little bit of love over here, baby.
Mark Cutney recently of a hole-in-one maker, huh?
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. Thank you. It's my first. It's kind of crazy.
First hole-in-one, so we got that going for us. Can you talk a little bit about, we're kind of trying to dig for some other like players here. What about? Do you guys have any thoughts around Cabrera Bello at all? I don't know if we missed that earlier, but what do you guys think about him, I guess, in general for this week?
So RCB is a guy that the Albatross projections usually love as a Euro guy that they just think is underpriced. The issue is, and just quite simply, he just hasn't played very well this season. Mm-hmm. He's been up and down recently, which is in a way good because he's at least had some ups. For a while there, it was pretty ugly week in and week out. I'm trying to scroll through the strokes gain trends on our website.
He contended last week, so he had a good week last week at the St. Jude, and he obviously had a good finish at the Players' Championship. A lot of that was driven by that late Albatross that he had that day. The thing with RCB is he's not super long.
No, he's not.
So, I like he's got a good long approach game, but in general, he's like I've kind of thought of him as like the European Tour's version of Kuchar. When you're not getting much of a price discount on that, I think that's why you're seeing the ownership fade away from him in this region. Collins got it at like sub 5%. He's got the kind of pedigree to contend in these events, but he's going to be an MME guy for me. He's not going to be a concentrated like favored GPP target for me. And I think I'm trying to find his price on FanDuel. If I remember his price on FanDuel trying to remember if it was this week or last week that it stood out. This week it's not that great. It's 7,600.
It's shitty, yeah.
Last week it was better. So he's probably a guy I won't have much exposure to on FanDuel. I'll have a little bit in mass multi-entry MME on DraftKings.
Cool. Thanks a lot. I mean, that's all I got, man. I just wanted to jump in and ask that quick question because we're setting this up right now as we go, and always love what you guys do, man. So we're just gonna continue watching on.
Thank you.
Awesome 1-5. All right, sub 7K. Let's go. One of my favorites week in and week out. I feels like I play him every week. Ben on,
baby.
$800. He's long off the tee. He's good at long approach shots. I'm surprised his odds are so bad on Sportsbook. I got him. I put a little bit down on 150 to 1 to start the week. He's improved since then, but he's still over 100 to 1. Surprised by the odds there. If you look at the recent strokes gained stuff, and not even recent, just like the whole season, I mean, he's been positive almost every week, and not just slightly, like not like huge positives, but pretty firmly in the positive side of strokes gained tee to green. Drewby, are you back now? Do you have any Ben on fire for us?
I mean, I think it's a great play, right? I think if this was like a regular DFS week at that price with just kind of like the normal DFS crowd, I think he'd be even more popular than he will be. So I think he's one of those guys that in like the higher stakes tournaments might get more ownership than he will. Like the whole way I built the model is basically like a function of the price point that the golfer's at, the odds, the fan share tags. And like I just had to make like a big manual adjustment up on him just because I felt like the chatter around the industry and like his form coming in was too good to be ignored. So I think like I kind of like Lee Westwood a little bit as like a pivot off him. That would be like a single digit kind of 5 or 6% owned guy in some of the GPPs. But I think like On and Leishman are definitely the best plays below 7K.
Don't you think Vegas is telling us something with Benny on though? Like this is one of these instances where I feel like if a play was going to be low owned, projected low owned, and Vegas odds liked him, we would use that as a reason to play him. But now he's projected to be high owned, and Vegas odds don't like him.
Well, they do like him, right? Like, so for at least what I'm looking at, like Bet365 top 20 odds, him and Westwood have the highest odds to top 20 below 7,000, along with Leishman and actually Billy Horschel.
Okay, so maybe it's just Sportsbook that hates him then. Maybe that's the key. Because Sportsbook has him at plus 450 to top 20 and Westwood at plus 250.
Yeah, I think Sportsbook does hate him. I was going to say, like, if you do stuff on
plus
Sportsbook,
250 is like an egregiously bad price on Westwood. Like, that's crazy to me.
Yeah. I almost feel like he's a better guy to bet than playing DFS. Because as Drew said, you're getting the high ownership. And I know not everybody can make a bet, but if you could, it's like bet him T20, maybe a little bit to win. If you hit, it's a huge payoff. He's going to be high owned in GPPs and DFS.
Yeah, I mean, he's like a DK guy though, right? Like he'll make a bunch of birdies if he makes a cut. Like, so
dude, he always finds the water. There's no water.
Yeah, he'll be digging in the fescue once or twice.
Yeah.
Mike, I really like Leishman this week once again. I mean, Drewby just mentioned him, but you're talking about like a consistent guy. I mean, my goodness, Leishman comes in with like really, really good form. I'm looking at all his shot gain stuff. It seems like he's been at least average or above average at essentially everything this year. Pretty solid distance too. And his birdie average ranks 30th. He's almost averaging 4 birdies. I mean, good Lord, I like him this week once again.
Yeah, I mean,
this whole range is going to be like, it's such a range of like tilting golfers that, especially for the U.S. Open, you could feel like you're in great shape heading into Saturday or Sunday with one of these guys, and like they could fire an 80 and just eject. It's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, and the ownership disparity is big, which I'm certainly not going to go overweight on Leishman or On. When they're 10 to 15% higher owned than other guys in this tier. In fact, I'm probably going to try and get a lot of 7K plus guys. But I mean, you got Zach Johnson, 6,900. I know he sucks now, but that's somewhat interesting. You know, we talked about Siwoo Kim earlier. I'll fire some in the Million Maker. Not a lot, but like 5 to 6% if he's going to be, you know, 1 to 2% owned. You know, of the low owned guys, I'll throw this to Dink. And somebody also asked you your favorite FanDuel GPP play. So if you want to hit, like, do you have a low owned guy sub 7K that you like? And who's your favorite FanDuel GPP play?
I like Louis on FanDuel as a GPP play even more than on DraftKings because I think the price tag on FanDuel is going to take ownership away from him. That is going to be like he's 8,400 on FanDuel, and you've got like Berger and Schwartzel at like 6,800. Like there's just big pricing discrepancies over there. So I think Louis is a really good GPP play there. In this sub 7K range, like I said before, Harmon is the guy that I think is really interesting. Pat Perez is a guy that I didn't mention before that I think is interesting from a GPP perspective. Really good long approach. Been really volatile off the tee, but I think it's okay to take the volatile guys that are long off the tee here because there are wider fairways. And in GPPs, yeah, if they get caught in that fescue, you're screwed. But you're taking these guys at like 1, 2, 3%, and that's fine. Lovemark's gotten a little bit more traction as the week's gone on. I do not mind him at all. He's played very well. He fits the course. But the ownership's starting to get up in the 5-6 range in terms of the projection. Same with Lucas Glover, who I like a lot. I'm going to have exposure to these guys. But in like 3 max and stuff like that, I feel like you might be able to get a guy like, you know, a Brian Harmon, or I'm trying to think of the other name that I mentioned before that I'm now scrolling past.
Ross Fisher?
Griot, who's only at 4. Fisher's fine, but I think he's going to be chalkier in the higher stakes stuff because he's been touted by some higher, like SDL cards, the higher stakes players touted him. So I think he'll carry enough ownership. But I think Griot is a guy that can contend at a major, and I think Harmon and Perez are guys there that I expect to be sub 5% that I think are pretty interesting GPP plays in the sub 7K range.
So I got one question for you guys. I've been thinking about a little bit with the new FanDuel setup, and I'm still not like completely there in my thought process. But I think like if we had to choose like 20 golfers for a fantasy team, we wouldn't worry about ownership at all, right? Just because like you're just making so many choices that you just hope you're making the best ones, and it kind of shakes out in the end. And so I guess like with FanDuel and the setup, where so few people are going to get 8 of 8 through the cut anyways, I feel like I'm focused a little bit more on just kind of trying to build like the best expected value team I can from like either projected fantasy points or odds of getting 8 of 8 through the cut. Whereas like on DK, where you're kind of forced into fewer selections, is where you kind of want to take like a little bit more of a stand. How do you guys kind of feel about like the contrarian versus just play max fantasy points nature on the 2 sites?
So obviously you're going to naturally have more likely that you're going to have a unique lineup taking 8 golfers. So the issue isn't there. It's just, I still think there's leverage to be had though. If you fade a 30% guy who misses the cut, like you're still going to be in great shape, even spread out over 8 golfers. And similar, if you can hit on a low owned guy that T10s, I think I'm probably less concerned about ownership, but I don't think it goes out the window where you're just solely thinking about best possible team.
Yeah, I think I agree maybe like this week, but or maybe not this week. Sorry, I think I agree last week where like it seems like they kind of had their prices set for these guys and they're just staying like at whatever price they're at, no matter what. They'll fluctuate like a couple $100, but like DJ is the price he is in this field, and he's going to be like the same price if he's playing in like the FedEx St. Jude. And so like it's so hard to make a good team this week on FanDuel that I feel like I just need to put my effort into that. Versus like last week, it was pretty easy to make a team. And so I think there is where you can try to get someone who's like, I mean, Fowler was like 50% owned. So obviously you benefited a lot if you faded him last week. But
I had a really easy time making bad teams on FanDuel last week. I made a lot of bad teams on FanDuel last week. I had a lot of Russell Henley. I had a lot of Ricky Fowler. So I did an excellent job at making bad teams on FanDuel last week. I'm going to try to reverse that this week. But my thinking on ownership regards to FanDuel is in a couple different areas. One, so much of the conversation still around DFS PGA centers around DraftKings that I think it's harder to pin down the ownership on FanDuel because we still don't have a lot of weeks of data of these, 8-man roster constructions on how the field is going to treat these players that have been talked up quite a bit during the week, regardless of price tag. Because, people are talking up, let's say like Louis Oosthuizen because he's 7,400 on DraftKings. They're not talking him up because he's 8,400 on FanDuel. And so it's interesting to see if that ownership carries over or not, but also because 8 guys is going to spread out the number of unique combinations, but also naturally ownership numbers in general are going to be a little bit higher just because you have more roster spots to fill. So it's like hard to figure out what's high owned on FanDuel compared to what's high. Like they're two different ownership games that I still haven't figured out how to sort through. So for me, I'm not really considering it too much. I'm just gonna try to identify the best plays because I don't have a good feel for where ownership's going to be. So if that's an unknown for me, whereas I feel like the people who have been working on ownership on DK do a pretty darn good job on it, that like you're within a tight error range that you can feel pretty good about leveraging that. I feel like I have no idea on FanDuel where things are going to be. So I can only kind of reference where guys are similarly cheap on DraftKings to FanDuel as to who will be highly owned. And maybe I'll tweak individual players here, but I'm not using it on the whole field to make my decisions because I don't have that much confidence in where my projections would lie.
I agree with Drew, by the way, 100%. I'm just not sure on ownership. So I'm just trying. I'm probably going to build more balanced teams on FanDuel, is what it is, instead of going more studs and dutsy, in my opinion. Mike, can I throw out there another guy that I like? That's cheap.
All right, I guess. Yeah.
I'll make it quick. Jamie Lovemark, who's been picking up tons of he's been picking up on the public tableau that Drewby has, the shots gained tee to green. He's been a beast last couple of weeks. And he's like 6,800 on DraftKings, 6,300 on FanDuel. I think in GBPs, that seems like a good way to potentially be a little bit contrarian.
Yeah, and he's got some length. The issue is, does he have, the iron play? He rates pretty poorly in the shots gained approach metrics, 150 to 200 yards out, which is where you get most of your approach shots. But I do see what you're saying. The recent form combined with the length on this course, if you're looking for a cheaper guy that can get it done, he's there. I'm taking a look here.
You mentioned you were going balanced on FanDuel. When you say balanced, do you mean like fading all the top 5 guys, or you just mean grabbing like one of them instead of trying to force in a bunch?
So if I were hypothetically playing on FanDuel with somebody that could play on FanDuel, what I would be doing is I think you're fading. Like I like the price tags on Rose and Fowler a ton on FanDuel. I think you could play a team with Rose, maybe both of them or just one of them, and just go really, really balanced and hit and keep yourself from taking any of like the sub 6,500K guys. You get, I really like this tier here where I think you get some upside on like Schwartzel, Bubba, Chappell in the mid to high 6s. So when I say balanced, I mean that's the bottom of my roster. I'm not digging below those guys.
But what about Pacheco?
Yeah, nobody cares about you, Mike.
No, Drewby, I think I'm more likely to grab the 9K guys like on DraftKings than the really expensive one. Doesn't mean that I won't have those guys, but yeah, I'm not likely to have multiple of those expensive guys this week on FanDuel. If I do, it will probably be just one. That's probably the route I'm taking.
That's interesting. Yeah, so I ran like one optimizer version based on just projected fantasy points, and so I guess I'm not playing cash on FanDuel, but if I was, I'd be using that, and it was grabbing 2 of those guys, which surprised me, and then punting with like a Ross Fisher, Glover types. But then I ran another, which was kind of like T20 optimal, and that seemed more balanced. Like grab one of the top guys, and then fill in just like a bunch of the Peters, Chappell, Berger, Duffner, like all that, the guys that aren't super exciting, but they usually make cuts.
Yeah, I guess, and sometimes it's a fault of mine, but again, I know this question wasn't directed towards me. Well, now I know. I didn't know at the time. My Italian IPA and the heat here, it's getting to me.
So damn hot.
It's
Italian
so hot.
IPA was a bad choice.
I immediately regret this decision.
But I want to ask Drewby a question, since I think he is one of the most. I'm getting you back. I'm hijacking you now. I want to ask Drewby a question because I think he's one of the most thoughtful guys out there in terms of talking through decisions that are on a larger scale, like broader decision making, and and he specializes and plays a lot of these 3 max. So what's your approach that changes between a 3 max and a mass multi-entry when you're looking at ownership projections, Colin? Like, what are the things that are different to you between those 2 types of formats when you sit down and you make teams and you're looking at your ownership projections?
So you're talking specifically just about like ownership projections, what I think happens with other people's choices? How
you use them for a mass multi-entry decision versus how you use them for a 3 max decision.
Yeah. So I think the first thing that happens in 3 maxes is it compresses a lot on the highest owned plays. And so if like my number is accurate on DJ being the most popular golfer, and people are mass multi-entering, they want to also grab a speed team and a Rory team. They might want a day team, and they're entering 10 teams. Maybe they'll have 3 of the 10 are DJ. And so anyways, I think in the 3 max, it compresses that. And so you get like higher ownership there, which in turn means you get lower ownership on like the Hideki, Stenson, Brooks types. So I think that's like the first thing I think about is just like, if we look at my numbers that I projected for the Millionaire Maker, like those numbers are going to go up even more on like the 3 max formats. So I think that's the first thing, is just like being aware of what happens with ownership. I think the other thing is you're just like thinking about how many people you're trying to separate yourself from. And so it's not even just like a 3 max, but like there's a difference, I think, between like a 3 max this week where they're pretty big for the US Open and a 3 max normal week where it might be 110, like more like a bigger version of like a league. And so I think truly if like a lot of the equity, if it is tied up in like the top finishing positions in the GPPs, you want to treat those 3 maxes different on like a large field 3 max and a small field 3 max. So
go ahead. Does
that make sense?
Yeah. I was going to follow up with,
so I think,
would you be more likely to fade a player that you liked that was going to carry substantial ownership, whether it's a high price guy or a mid price guy, like one of these guys that's going to be 17% or greater? Would you be more likely to fade them in a 3 max situation or a smaller GPP or a larger field GPP?
I don't know. If I really like a guy, it's always hard for me to like outright fade unless the ownership is like egregiously high. So okay. I think in a 3 max, like I want to differentiate at least one of the spots on my roster from something that's super chalky to a play that I like, that I think will be like single digit ownership. And I think when you hit like the Millionaire Maker, I almost want like 3 spots to be like that.
Okay. That helps me a lot. And that idea of the rule with Cruncher with like no more than of a certain group of players in a price range, I thought that already is going to make my lineup building process late tonight so much more sharp, in my opinion. So thank you for that note.
Drewby. All right. DK, super cheap, guys. Anybody like 6,600-ish? I know I've got an MME, some like Haas. I don't have anybody at 6,500. I don't think, or less in my my MME.
My wife made a Millionaire Maker
6,500 or less.
Drewby's wife has someone at 6,500 or below.
She played at Bill Haas. She made a million make a team. She's
6,600. That's freaking not 6,500.
Yeah. I am not playing anyone at 6,500 or below. I think Chris Wood is a reasonable play. He seems like the only reasonable play. 500 below.
It's one of these guys I think are more interesting on FanDuel, because on FanDuel, like the cheapest price range goes down to like 4,500, and there's all these AMs are down there, versus like there's some guys that are like mid fives, so the pricing range is a little bit wider on FanDuel. So like a guy that I think is interesting on FanDuel, but he's 6,400 on DraftKings. And I don't think I'd play him there because the price gap between him and the other, mid sixes guys isn't as severe as it is on FanDuel. Is Xander Schauffele, who's really long. He always kind of rates well in Alba. He played pretty well last week, made the cut. I think rounded like a top 30 or 40. But he's a guy that I think
dreadful field.
Yeah, in a dreadful field, right? Way different than this field, obviously. But he's a guy that on FanDuel, he's just 4,800. And I think he's viable from a tournament perspective. But again, I think these super, super cheap guys are just more attractive on FanDuel, where there's a wider pricing spectrum than they are on DraftKings, where they get condensed closer to good plays.
Totally agree with Drew, by the way. I'm not gonna have much of 6,500, but I probably will have none on DraftKings. None.
Chris Wood's gonna get played by a few, like 3 or 4%, right? Like he's 15% odds to T20 when you adjust it for the rake. Come out of the equation, you add up like the T20 odds of every other golfer at 6,500 below. The expectation is that like 2 of those 60 guys might crack the top 20, and so you're playing like 60 guys for like an egregiously low expectation. And you kind of, especially in the like millionaire maker, you kind of need all your guys to at least be racking up some points. And so I think the only way it like happens to work out is if you get one of those guys who makes a cut, and it's like an Uber team, and then like DJ and Spieth like blow away the field, and you have to have those 2 guys in the same team to win, or something like that,
Yeah, that's one of the things where like you look at the field and you're kind of like, oh man, top 60, that's a big cut for a generally full field, like 150, 160 golfers. But then you look at some of these AMs and whatnot that take up space, and you're like, oh, okay, it's more like 100-person field, most likely, in terms of knocking a bunch of these guys out. So it becomes a little less daunting to get players through the cut line.
Yeah. And then like there's gonna be people going negative on FanDuel. Like if I could take like a 0 from a player at like 4,500 on FanDuel, I'd be interested.
Where's Tiger when you need him, man? Need Tiger priced at the minimum that you can take your 0, Drewby, and play game theory with that.
Mike says that I am now hosting. I'm not sure what the heck he's doing right now. Let's see. Do you guys have any final thoughts? Because I think we're going to wrap up pretty shortly here. Drewby, I'll throw it to you. Do you have any final thoughts at all? Anything that you haven't mentioned that you think would be useful for us to consider this week?
No, man. I've been pretty prepared all week, and at the same time, like this is the latest I've ever waited to get started actually building my teams on DraftKings. So pretty good job on my part.
Who's your winner this week, Drewby?
Adam Scott.
There it is.
So I like Adam Scott a lot. I'm gonna eat the chalk on DraftKings, probably play him on FanDuel, where he should be a little bit less popular. I'm gonna play him in one and done and continue my dominance there.
So that would be 4 in a row if Drewby hits in our one and done league, which he is. Basically it's Drewby, and then you add up the scores of the rest of us, and we're now contending with Drewby. I'm
just going like full one and done tout next year.
Yeah. You dominate the 7-man one and done leagues like no one I've ever seen.
Tough competition.
It's tough competition. We've had at
Guys,
least
don't
4
picks.
people not play someone on a given week. So far, myself and Colin and Logan's brother and Pacheco are the only ones to, I think, submit. Oh, Pacheco's not even in the league.
No,
That's
I'm
right.
not. I was
Right.
about to say, dude.
Ooh.
I wanted to bring that up, Pacheco, about how you're not in the one and done league, and that was my way to do it by joking that you haven't missed a pick all year.
Well, I was actually going to compliment Drewby and say that he's the Aaron Judge of that
He is.
league. I mean, it just doesn't seem like you can put a
That's a
baseline
baseball
on the
player.
guy. Yeah, he's Babe Ruth now. You can't put a baseline
Yeah.
on the guy. He's just going to crush it every single time. Drew, I'm really sorry to disappoint you and not be in the league, but look, Drewby kicked our butts in this one league that we did. What was it? An MFL 10.
Yeah.
I mean, he kicked our butts. Honestly, I was like last or almost. Yeah, it was almost like I was second to last or dead last. I mean, it's a huge pride issue for me. That really knocked me down. I'm not sure if I can run this again. Basically, is what I'm doing. I don't think I can do it again, Drew. I'm sorry.
Fair.
Drew, do you have any final thoughts? Obviously, you already mentioned who you think is going to win this week, so I'm not going to be asking you that. But do you have any final thoughts for us?
Drew, are you playing Louis in cash if people are still looking to pick up head-to-head games?
Yeah, I will. So I'm gonna run a few different cash lineups, but he will be in more than 50% of my cash lineups if people are looking to pick up my head-to-heads. They're available.
You guys don't like Louis.
That's on
go pick up some
DraftKings.
big fees
I have not decided on FanDuel if I'm gonna shove Louis on FanDuel and cash, but I really do like him. I just wish the ownership wasn't going in the direction that it has all week long, which is maybe partially my fault. But no, I think this will be a fun week. I love watching the U.S. Open, and the Masters is a tougher time of the year for me with MLB and NBA going that I don't get to really enjoy and watch as much of it. The Open Championship is good timing for me during the summer where it's a little bit calmer and in the middle of the night where nobody's annoying me. So I like that major as well. But I'm gonna have fun watching this. I think it's one of these weeks though for me from a GPP perspective that at least on DraftKings, it's a little bit tougher for me because I'm probably going to run a narrower player pool than I usually do because the players I like are already somewhat chalky and I want to be overweight on the players I like. So I'm probably going to have a tighter core, and then I'm going to try to mix in some of these guys that I usually have like a bunch of bullets in the low 7s, high 6s with guys with like 10% ownership. I'll probably have a couple more guys concentrated that I think are going to be sub 5 in the 15 to 20% ownership. So I'll probably have a smaller core of players that I'm used to playing this week. So hopefully some of those lineups hit. Hopefully for you guys have a sweat on the weekend as well.
No one asked me for my winner, I guess, because you guys don't really care for my take. I'm assuming that's why no one asked.
You can give it. I mean, it's cool.
Right. Like you
give
can give it, but it's not going to carry much weight.
No, but go ahead.
That's
I mean,
fine.
I mean, Mark Cutney is eagerly awaiting. We heard from Hummel before that you've got a big fan.
Do you think I'm a fish or something, dude? I mean, let me give my winner for God's sake. I'm going to go a little contrarian, and I'm going to say, I mean, I just haven't heard his name a lot this week, but I'm going to go with Hideki, who's my favorite play this week in GPPs. I might have him in cash games too. I'm still thinking about it, but he's
don't do that in cash, but that's a great GPP play. I like it.
He's my winner. He's my winner of the week. Mike, glad to have you back. You just missed my winner.
I heard your winner, Hideki.
Yeah, dude, Hideki. He's my winner.
He's French,
Drew,
right?
by the way, Drew thinks I'm kind of a fish, and he doesn't really care for my takes. So there's that too.
Do you want to know who my winner is?
Yeah, I do.
Peters, baby.
Oh, my
Thomas
God.
Peters taking it down.
I should have just said Stenson at that point. Shit.
You say Stenson like I'm throwing this headset. Done. If Henrik wins, I'm gonna be like curled up fetal position all weekend if Henrik's in contention after what he's done to me this season.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Drew. I mean, he's still one of my favorite players, dude. There's no one. There's nothing you can do about it.
F that guy.
I know, Mike.
I'm just gonna. I'm gonna go make at least one full game theory team in the
Led by
Yeah.
Stenson.
Matsuyama, Stenson,
This
and Bubba. Yeah. That's gonna be
Oh
it.
my God.
Okay.
Oh.
Jesus.
Oh, by the way, key piece of information. I saw Bubba's practice round today. He was practicing
Oh,
with
God.
pink ball.
Pink ball.
Pink ball on the practice
ball
round.
theory.
So, play him at your own risk.
I don't think I
All
can.
right, boys.
I can't do
I'm
Bubba
gonna-
this week.
I'm gonna hop off and actually start to build some teams. I guess.
Peace.
Yeah.
I think
Time
we're,
to shut
we're
down. Time to build. Hope you guys out there enjoyed it. Wish you all the best of luck.
good luck, everybody. Peace.
Peace, guys.